March 15, 1962, 2:30 p.m. Vincent "the Snake" Torrino was still laughing when Bumpy Johnson walked through the doors of Romano's restaurant in Little Italy. Alone. 24 hours earlier, Torrino had sent word to Harlem. "Tell that black boy if he wants to discuss the dock situation, he comes to us. No bodyguards, no backup, just him." It was a setup. Everyone knew it was a setup. Torrino had 8 men positioned throughout the restaurant. Professional killers. The plan was simple. Bumpy walks in, Bumpy doesn't walk out. But when Bumpy Johnson pushed through those doors in his perfectly pressed gray suit, carrying nothing but a leather briefcase, Torrino couldn't help but laugh. "Either this guy's got the biggest balls in New York," Torrino said to his underboss, "or he's the dumbest man alive." 90 seconds later, Vincent Torrino wasn't laughing anymore. What happened in those 90 seconds would become legend in the streets. It would change the balance of power between Harlem and Little Italy forever. And it would prove that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the room isn't a gun, it's knowing something your enemy doesn't. Before we dive into this story, if you're loving these legendary Bumpy Johnson tales, smash that like button and hit subscribe. We drop these incredible true stories every single day, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. To understand what happened in Romano's restaurant that day, you need to understand the war that had been building between Harlem and Little Italy for 3 long years. By 1962, Bumpy Johnson wasn't just the king of Harlem anymore. He was expanding. His numbers operation had grown so successful that he'd started moving into legitimate businesses. Restaurants, barbershops, even a small shipping company down at the docks. The docks. That's where the trouble started. For 30 years, the Italian families had controlled every major shipping operation in New York. Every truck that moved, every crate that got lost, every envelope that changed hands. The Italians got their cut. It was their territory, and they protected it like hungry dogs. But Bumpy saw an opportunity. The civil rights movement was changing everything. Black longshoremen were demanding better treatment, better pay, better working conditions. The Italian families ignored them. Bumpy didn't. He started small, a few contracts here and there, protection for black workers who were being hassled, transportation deals that cut out the Italian middlemen. Nothing too big, nothing too obvious. Vincent Torrino noticed anyway. Torrino was different from the other Italian bosses. While they were old-school traditionalists who relied on fear and violence, Torrino was a businessman, smart, calculating, and absolutely ruthless. He'd taken over the Torrino family when he was just 28 years old, and in 5 years, he'd doubled their income. He was also a racist, not the loud, obvious kind, the quiet, deadly kind, the kind who smiled to your face while planning your funeral. When Torrino's accountant showed him how much money they were losing to Bumpy's dock operations, he called a meeting with his lieutenants. "This ends now," he said. "I don't care if he thinks he's the king of Harlem. Down at my docks, there's only one king, and that's me." Torrino had tried the usual tactics first. He sent men to intimidate Bumpy's workers. Bumpy's people sent them back to Little Italy in ambulances. He tried bribing dock supervisors to cancel Bumpy's contracts. Bumpy had better connections and bigger bribes. For 3 years, it had been a chess match. Move and counter-move. But by March 1962, Torrino was tired of playing games. He wanted Bumpy Johnson dead. The problem was, Bumpy was untouchable in Harlem. His neighborhood was like a fortress. Torrino's men couldn't get within 10 blocks of Bumpy without being spotted. So Torrino decided to bring Bumpy to him. The Italian families had always believed they were superior. They saw themselves as the real gangsters, the professionals. Guys like Bumpy were just street thugs who got lucky. This thinking would prove to be Torrino's biggest mistake. Because while Torrino was stuck in his old-world mentality, Bumpy was operating like a modern businessman. He understood that the game was changing. The days of settling everything with bullets were ending. Information was becoming more valuable than intimidation, and Bumpy Johnson was about to prove it. March 13, 1962. Romano's restaurant, Little Italy. Vincent Torrino sat at his usual table in the back corner, surrounded by his most trusted men. The restaurant was closed to the public. This was business. "Here's what we're going to do," Torrino said, cutting into his veal. "We send word to Johnson. Tell him we want to discuss the dock situation like civilized businessmen." His underboss, Marco Santini, looked confused. "Boss, we've been trying to kill this guy for 3 years. Why would he trust us enough to come to a meeting?" Torrino smiled. "Because we're going to make him think he has no choice. We tell him to come alone, or we start hitting his people. Hard. We give him 48 hours to decide." "And when he shows up?" asked Tony, the fish Marconi. "When he shows up, we kill him. Right here, in our territory. Then we send his body back to Harlem with a message. The docks belong to us." The plan was perfect in its simplicity. Torrino would position 8 armed men throughout the restaurant. 2 at the front entrance, 2 at the back exit, 2 in the kitchen, and 2 upstairs in the apartment above. Every angle covered, no escape route. When Bumpy walked in, they'd let him sit down. Maybe even order a drink. Make him think he was safe. Then, on Torrino's signal, they'd fill him full of holes. "What if he doesn't come?" Santini asked. "He'll come," Torrino said confidently. "His pride won't let him back down. These Harlem guys, they're all about reputation. He can't look weak in front of his people." The message was delivered the next morning. A young Italian kid walked into Small's Paradise, Bumpy's jazz club, and handed an envelope to the bartender. "For Mr. Johnson," the kid said, then disappeared. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper with Torrino's message. "Mr. Johnson, the dock situation has gone on long enough. Let's settle this like businessmen. Tomorrow, 2:30 p.m., Romano's restaurant, Mulberry Street. Come alone, or we start hitting your people. You have 24 hours to decide. V. Torrino." When Bumpy read the message, his lieutenants gathered around him. "Boss, this is obviously a trap," said Illinois Gordon, Bumpy's most trusted advisor. "They want you dead." "Of course it's a trap," Bumpy replied calmly. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" "We hit them first," suggested Raymond the Baptist Washington. "Take out Torrino before he gets the chance." Bumpy shook his head. "That starts a war we might not be able to finish. The Italian families have more men, more guns, more connections." "So what do you suggest?" Illinois asked. Bumpy was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was the kind of smile that made smart men nervous. "I'm going to that meeting," he said. "Boss, you can't be serious," Illinois protested. "I'm dead serious, but I'm not going in blind." His men looked at each other with worry. They'd seen that look in Bumpy's eyes before. It meant he had a plan. It also meant someone was about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating Bumpy Johnson. "What do you need us to do?" Illinois asked. "Nothing," Bumpy said. "This is something I have to handle alone. But don't worry. Vincent Torrino thinks he's setting a trap for me. What he doesn't know is that I've been setting a trap for him for 3 years." That night, Bumpy made several phone calls. To lawyers, to federal agents he'd been cultivating, to informants who worked inside the Italian families, to young men like Michael Ricci who believed in doing the right thing. By morning, everything was in place. What Vincent Torrino didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson had been preparing for this moment for 3 years. Bumpy understood something that most people missed about power. It wasn't just about having the biggest guns or the most men. Real power came from having better information than your enemies, and Bumpy Johnson had the best information network in New York. See, while Torrino was focused on the big picture, the dock contracts, the territory wars, the respect, Bumpy was focused on the details. He knew that Romano's restaurant got its produce delivered every Tuesday morning by Gino's Fresh Foods. He knew that the delivery man, Paolo Ricci, had a gambling problem and owed money all over Little Italy. More importantly, Bumpy knew that Paolo's younger brother, Michael, worked for him. Michael Ricci was 19 years old and made $10 a week running numbers for Bumpy's operation in East Harlem. He was Italian, but he'd grown up in a mixed neighborhood. He didn't share his family's prejudices, and he respected Bumpy. 2 days before the meeting, Bumpy called Michael into his office. "I need a favor," Bumpy said. "Anything, Mr. Johnson." "Your brother Paolo. He delivers to Romano's restaurant, right?" Michael nodded. "Every Tuesday. Why?" Bumpy opened his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. Inside was $500. "I need Paolo to make an extra delivery tomorrow. A special order. Can you arrange that?" Michael looked at the money, then at Bumpy. What kind of special order? The kind that's going to save my life and keep your brother out of debt to some very dangerous people. The next morning, Paolo Ricci made 2 deliveries to Romano's restaurant. The first was his regular order: fresh vegetables, meat, bread. The second was a small crate that Bumpy had personally prepared. Paolo didn't ask what was in the crate. For $500, he didn't need to know. But Vincent Torrino should have asked. While Torrino was positioning his shooters and checking his guns, Bumpy was making a different kind of preparation. He spent the morning at his lawyer's office, updating his will and making sure his business affairs were in order, not because he expected to die, but because a smart man always prepares for every possibility. Then he made another visit to FBI agent Robert Davis, a federal investigator who'd been trying to build cases against organized crime for 10 years. "Agent Davis," Bumpy said, sitting across from the federal agent in a downtown coffee shop, "I have something that might interest you." Bumpy opened a briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were photographs, recordings, and shipping manifests that documented Vincent Torrino's illegal gun-running operation. Agent Davis looked through the materials with growing excitement. "Where did you get all this?" "Let's just say I make it my business to know what happens on the docks," Bumpy replied. "The question is, what are you going to do with it?" "We've been trying to get Torrino for years. This is enough to put him away for 20 years. When can we move on this?" Bumpy checked his watch. "How about tomorrow afternoon, say around 2:45 p.m.? Then he went home, showered, and put on his best gray suit, the same suit he'd worn to his mother's funeral, the same suit he'd worn when he'd negotiated his first major contract, the same suit that had become his signature. At 2:00 p.m., Bumpy picked up a leather briefcase, a different one than he'd shown Agent Davis, and walked out of his apartment, alone. His men watched from the windows as he got into a yellow cab and headed toward Little Italy. They wanted to follow him, but Bumpy had been clear. "If this goes wrong, it goes wrong because of my choices, not because you tried to save me." The cab dropped Bumpy off 3 blocks from Romano's restaurant. He walked the rest of the way, taking his time, observing everything. He counted the men loitering on street corners, Torrino's spotters. He noticed the "closed for private party" sign in the restaurant window. He saw the black Cadillacs parked nearby, engines running. Everything was exactly as he'd expected. At exactly 2:30 p.m., Bumpy Johnson pushed through the doors of Romano's restaurant. Vincent Torrino was sitting at his usual table when Bumpy walked in. The Italian boss looked up from his espresso and started laughing. "Jesus Christ," Torrino said to Marco Santini. "He actually came, and he really is alone." Bumpy stood in the doorway for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light. He could see Torrino's men positioned exactly where he'd expected them. 2 by the front windows, 2 near the kitchen door, 2 more upstairs. He could see their shadows moving behind the curtains. "Mr. Torrino," Bumpy said, walking slowly toward the table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Torrino was still chuckling. "Sit down, Johnson. Can I get you something to drink? Coffee? Wine? A last meal?" Bumpy sat down across from Torrino and placed his briefcase on the table. "Coffee would be nice. Black." Torrino snapped his fingers, and one of his men brought over a cup of coffee. The tension in the room was thick. 8 armed men, all waiting for their boss's signal. "You know why you're here," Torrino said, his voice dropping the friendly pretense. "I assume it's about the dock contracts," Bumpy replied calmly, sipping his coffee. "It's about respect," Torrino said. "It's about knowing your place. You've been stepping on my toes for 3 years, Johnson. That stops today." Bumpy nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right. Someone has been disrespectful. Someone has been stepping where they don't belong." Torrino smiled, thinking he was getting through. "Exactly. So, here's what's going to happen." "The question is," Bumpy interrupted, "who's been doing the stepping?" That's when Bumpy opened his briefcase. Torrino's men tensed, hands moving toward their guns. But Bumpy didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the table. "What's this?" Torrino asked. "Your homework," Bumpy said. "Open it." Torrino opened the folder. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Pictures of Torrino's men meeting with federal agents. Pictures of money changing hands. pictures of shipping manifests being passed to men in government suits. Torrino's face went white. "You see, Vincent," Bumpy said, his voice still calm, "while you were focused on me, I was focused on you, and what I found was very interesting." Bumpy reached into the briefcase again and pulled out a tape recorder. He set it on the table and pressed play. Torrino's own voice filled the restaurant. "Tell Agent Morrison that we'll have the next shipment ready on Thursday. Same deal as before. We move the cargo, he looks the other way, everybody makes money." Bumpy pressed stop. "You've been running guns to communist rebels in Cuba, Vincent, using federal agents to smuggle them through the docks, the same docks you've been trying to keep me away from." Torrino's hands were shaking now. How did I know?" "Because I make it my business to know everything that happens on those docks. Every truck, every crate, every envelope, including the ones you thought you were hiding." Bumpy pulled out a third item from his briefcase, a letter with official FBI letterhead. "This is a copy of the report I delivered to the Federal Bureau of Investigation this morning, along with copies of all the photos and recordings. By now, I'd guess federal agents are already moving on your operation." As if on cue, the sound of car doors slamming echoed from outside. Through the restaurant windows, everyone could see federal agents surrounding the building. Torrino's men looked around nervously. This wasn't part of the plan. "You son of a bitch," Torrino whispered. Bumpy stood up and straightened his tie. "Now, Vincent, let me explain something to you. I didn't come here to negotiate. I didn't come here to make a deal. I came here to deliver a message." He picked up his briefcase and looked down at Torrino. "The message is this: I know everything. I see everything. And if you ever threaten me or my people again, I won't just destroy your business. I'll destroy your life." The front door burst open. FBI agents poured into the restaurant, guns drawn. "Vincent Torrino, you're under arrest for conspiracy, weapons trafficking, and violation of federal firearm statutes." As the agents moved to arrest Torrino and his men, Bumpy walked calmly toward the door. One of the FBI agents stopped him. "Mr. Johnson, Agent Davis, FBI, thank you for your cooperation in this matter." "Just doing my civic duty," Bumpy replied. As Bumpy walked out of Romano's restaurant, he could hear Torrino screaming behind him. "This isn't over, Johnson! You hear me? This isn't over!" Bumpy paused in the doorway and looked back. "You're right, Vincent. It's not over. It's just beginning. But don't worry. From federal prison, you'll have plenty of time to think about what happens to people who underestimate Bumpy Johnson." 90 seconds. That's all it had taken for Bumpy to turn Vincent Torrino's trap into Torrino's nightmare. Word of what happened at Romano's restaurant spread through New York's underworld like wildfire. By evening, every mobster from Brooklyn to the Bronx had heard the story. Bumpy Johnson had walked into a death trap alone and turned it into an FBI sting operation. Vincent Torrino, one of the most powerful bosses in Little Italy, was sitting in federal custody facing 25 years in prison. The other Italian families called an emergency meeting that night. The question on everyone's mind: how did Bumpy Johnson know about Torrino's gun-running operation? The answer was simpler than they thought. For 3 years, while they'd been focused on territory and tradition, Bumpy had been building relationships. With federal agents who were tired of corrupt cops. With dock workers who were tired of being exploited. With young Italian kids like Michael Ricci, who saw Bumpy as a man of honor in a world full of criminals. "We underestimated him," admitted Carlo Gambino at the emergency meeting. "We thought he was just another street thug. He's not. He's a strategist." "So what do we do?" asked Anthony Salerno. "We leave him alone," Gambino said. "We focus on our own operations and stay out of Harlem. Because if we don't, we might be the next ones getting arrested." Vincent Torrino was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. He would die behind bars in 1978, still claiming that Bumpy Johnson had ruined his life. But Torrino had ruined his own life the moment he decided that his prejudice was more important than his business sense. The dock contracts? Bumpy kept them all. Within 2 years, his shipping operation had expanded to cover half the waterfront. He used the profits to build schools in Harlem and provide loans to black businesses. And Romano's restaurant? It closed 6 months later. Nobody wanted to eat at the place where Vincent, the Snake Torrino, had been outsmarted by the man he'd tried to kill. The story of Bumpy Johnson and Vincent Torrino became legend for one simple reason. It proved that the most powerful weapon isn't always the most obvious one. Torrino had 8 guns pointed at Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy had something better: information, patience, and the intelligence to use both. While his enemies were planning his death, Bumpy was planning their destruction. While they were focused on the short game, he was playing the long game. While they were thinking like gangsters, he was thinking like a chess master. That's what separated Bumpy Johnson from every other player in New York's underworld. He understood that real power doesn't come from fear. It comes from knowledge. And he understood that the best way to win a war is to make sure your enemy defeats himself. Vincent Torrino learned that lesson too late. By the time he stopped laughing, his fate was already sealed. If this incredible true story blew your mind, you know what to do. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring that notification bell. We're bringing you the most unbelievable Bumpy Johnson stories every single day, and each one is more incredible than the last. Drop a comment and let me know. Do you think Bumpy Johnson was right to turn Torrino over to the FBI? Or should he have handled it the old-fashioned way? And here's the real question. How do you think Torrino felt when he realized he'd been outplayed by the man he'd tried to kill? Next week, we're telling the story of how Bumpy Johnson walked into a police station and walked out with the commissioner's badge. Yeah, you heard that right. A story so wild, so unbelievable, that even Hollywood wouldn't dare to film it. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you absolutely do not want to miss that story. Remember, in the game of power, it's not about having the biggest guns. It's about having the best information. And nobody had better information than the king of Harlem himself, Bumpy Johnson.